talk about how the county maintains election integrity and protects voters' rights is interim Harris County Jonathan Fombonne. Good morning and welcome to Hello Houston.
Thanks for having me.
And if you would like to join the conversation, if you have a question, you can call or text 713-440-8870.
Let's just start off with the idea that a lot of people have that they're worried about election integrity just at the base point. Talk a little bit about how secure, how safe, and how accurate we know our elections to be.
Yeah, so the election code in Texas is this very long, convoluted system of redundancies to make sure that at every step of the way, right, from the time that election machines are selected all the way to when a voter casts a vote, there is no way for anybody to interfere in the process. So you hear things, for example, like, somebody could hack the voting machines. Well, no, that's not true. The voting machines and systems are approved by the Secretary of State's office. Very few companies qualify to do that kind of business in Texas. They are not on a Wi-Fi system that somebody can hack. They're stored securely pursuant to the law throughout the year, so it's not like people can easily access them and change how they're programmed. There's something called a logic and accuracy test, which is when the ballot is tested to make sure that it is exactly how it's supposed to be, and it's a public process that folks can come and watch. So every step along the way, there are ways for both the public but also elected officials to make sure that the process is run with full integrity, and that if you're following the law, which everybody is, there are no questions about how voting is conducted in the state.
So then I've got to ask, what type of overlap happens between you, for example, the Harris County Attorney versus our Harris County Clerk, Tanisha Hudspeth? What's the overlap jurisdiction of those both roles?
So we are the lawyers for all elected officials in Harris County level officials, including the county clerk, Tanisha Hudspeth. And so we are her civil lawyer. We are there as a resource to make sure that if there are any questions about the election code, we are there to answer them. That said, the folks at the clerk's office are also experts in the election code.
Right.
They know a lot of it already. And so we really work as a team with them, right, to make sure that if they have questions, that, those questions can be answered. If we need to interface with the Secretary of State's office and there's a legal issue, we're involved. If we need to interface with the political parties or other smaller jurisdictions that are running their elections in Harris County, we are there to draft their contracts. We just work in tandem with them every step of the way.
And for people to remember, we just wrapped up a early voting.
Elections, yeah.
Tomorrow is Election Day, and you're here to say people should feel safe and secure that their vote is being counted accurately.
That's right.
Now, we know that it's a primary, and so we each, in early voting, you go up there, you tell them, and they ask you which ballot do you want, and they give you the ballot, either Republican or Democrat. On Election Day, you mentioned it's going to be a little different. Explain to people what they can expect. And I know this isn't necessarily your realm because you're not the elections administrator, but you have the legal understanding of it for us.
Yeah, sure. So under the election code, you can run what's called a joint primary or really a split primary. Joint primary is the anchoring term. And a joint primary is what we've experienced recently in the county where, as you said, you come in and they say Republican or Democrat, and you'll get your little ticket. And you go to one of the machines, and it'll pull up whichever ballot you ask for. In the split version of the primary, the locations are separate. So even if they're in the same building, you will go to a different, maybe part of the building or part of the room, and you'll interface with a different check-in process. And so that's something voters might not be used to, because over the last few primaries, I can't remember the last time we did a split primary in the county, but you'll be going to a separate check-in desk. So if you're a Republican, it'll have directions for you to go to the Republican side of the room or the building. Same for a Democrat.
So why are they doing it that way? Do you know what the benefit or problems are with it?
So the stated issues have been that the parties want to have their own clerks. So those are the staff people that really run the elections. These are not full-time members of the Harris County Clerk's office. These are they're not volunteers; they get paid, but these are people who work, usually with the party and are appointed by the party. That those folks are folks of their own parties, right? In a joint primary, even though you have representation from both parties, some of the clerks, in theory, could be more affiliated with one party. So that was part of the desire. I think there may be other reasons, political reasons going on in the background. I'm not going to going to speculate to that, but that's something that you've seen the state Republican Party really push for this year.
I guess another question I have is that elections are run by people. And as you said, there are these a lot of wonderful people volunteer to run our elections. And with the sheer number of polling locations we have and the sheer number of voters we have in our area, human error is going to come into play. At what level and how do you differentiate between what is human error and what is criminal activity? How can you parse those two?
Yeah, it's very hard to do, right? You need to show intent usually. But one of the ways that we do that is making sure that we're prepared with law enforcement partners, but also with other groups, right? With the parties, with voting rights groups, to make sure that there's a differentiation between, like you said, human error and somebody actually trying to commit some kind of illegal activity. We really do not see the kind of criminal voter fraud that people talk about. That's not something we see. The types of criminal activities we might see are, let's just say some intimidation at the polls, and sometimes it may not even be intentional. It may just be somebody who's struggling that day and confronting voters. But again, what we do to address all those things is we have a task force at the county, and we got the county clerk, our office, different law enforcement agencies who work together to be able to respond to any kind of incident. And so if something comes in, it gets triaged. If we think, this is just a question that an election clerk might have about how the law is supposed to operate here, it'll get routed to our office. If this is an incident where we need to get law enforcement involved to make sure that voters are able to cast their vote in a protected manner, then it'll go to the right law enforcement agency.
Do we know the actual percentage of what actual type of voter fraud there is within our county elections?
So I think
understood it's very low.
I don't think we have data on that precisely, but there are very, very few reports of that actually happening. I know the Attorney General has a task force that's out there, and then he's had the last few years where he investigates incidents of voter frauds and brings prosecutions. I've seen very few cases come out of that. Certainly not anywhere near the number you would need to affect the result of an election.
Yeah.
And so if the Attorney General does come to you and says, we want to look into this, what does the county actually hand over?
So it depends on the request, right? Some of the evidence they might need is not in the possession of the county, but if they need records and they submit a records request, that's something that we'll certainly comply with. I mean, again, I've been at the county now 5 years and involved in elections every step of the way. That is really not something we see much of.
Yeah.
I'm waiting in line. I'm going to vote. I see something I think doesn't feel right. I see, or I have an interaction with a polling person, which I just feel like something's off here. What should I do?
Right. So if you have an interaction with a polling person, there's usually someone who's a presiding judge, and you'll sort of see that person walking around. They usually look like they're in charge. You can talk to them and report your complaint or whatever it might be. You should also go on harrisvotes.com, and there are numbers there that you can call to make sure that your complaint's being addressed by the clerk's office if you feel like the presiding judge or the election clerk that's there has not addressed your concern. So
we shouldn't be reaching out to your office.
And so we provide legal advice, and so we don't have an attorney-client relationship with those folks. Now, people do, and if we can answer the question, we will. But at your first point of contact should be the clerk's office.
Okay. It is fascinating to me. I voted on Friday, early voting. First of all, I'll say I was surprised how many people were out early voting on Friday afternoon and the lines to vote. And I thought this is a great sign for democracy. People are getting out and having their voices heard. When I got up to the first official that was going to give me my ticket to go and vote, there was confusion there were so many people and they were doing multiple ones at a time that I felt like they put my information in twice. But they only generated one ticket and gave it to me. When I get my ticket, I go and I vote. If others are generated, other number tickets, can someone else vote with those? And I don't know if this is in your area of expertise or not, but should they do something if a second ticket prints out on their machine? I know this is really in the weeds. Sorry, folks. But I'm just curious because I saw them scratch it up, throw it away. But then I'm thinking, is that an active number? If someone else grabbed that number and went to a machine, could they type it in and vote? How does that work, or do they void it? Do we know?
So I believe they void it on their end. And so first of all, the first protection on this is it is against the law to cast more than one ballot or to cast a ballot as somebody else. But every code is tied to a specific person. So I'm not sure exactly what happened in your case, but if they printed more than one, they couldn't have both been assigned to you.
Oh,
right?
so they had to void one out to print the next one. Okay, good. I feel better now.
I am curious, though, about voter intimidation and when you look at something like that from the legal standpoint, because I have had friends that will say, I went up to go vote and there are these huge trucks with lots of flags and, people are there and you feel just some high emotion. What is the legal protection in Texas around voter intimidation?
Yeah, so the first legal protection is you cannot do what's called electioneering within the 100-foot marker. And I'm sure we've all seen when we get to the polls, there are those signs that say this is 100 feet from the voting location. You cannot do electioneering. Electioneering means anything done for or against a candidate or measure, right? So that's why you see when you get to that sign, then you see all the other signs start after that, right?
Right.
And the folks who are sort of coming up to you and pushing cards, they cannot operate within the bounds of that sign. So that's supposed to be the sanctuary for the voters. That said, I fully understand that you can still see them, and of course the tactics that are used, before you get to that sign might not be savory. You can't intimidate voters, right? That's against federal law. The Voting Rights Act is very clear on that. Of course, the First Amendment has to run up against that, right? And people are allowed to sort of petition voters and make clear why they think people should vote for them. Luckily, we don't see a ton of interactions that can be deemed intimidation. I certainly haven't seen a lot of that. And when that does happen, your first step has to be to call either the county clerk's office or law enforcement. Certainly nobody should be using any kind of threats of physical violence, but really people are not supposed to get in your face and yell, right? Yeah. And so the other thing is that the election clerks, part of their job is also to make sure that that's not happening. And so they are trained to identify those situations, to de-escalate where appropriate, or escalate to the clerk's office or to law enforcement where they need to.
I've asked this before. I'll ask it of you now. It's poll watchers. There's a lot of talk now about poll watchers and wanting them there to keep the integrity and all that. What are the regulations on where a poll watcher can be? What can they witness? How far away must they stand? What do we know?
Yeah. So first of all, we've had poll watchers forever, not just in Texas, in most states. That is something that's existed for a long time. Poll watchers cannot see what you're voting for. They're not allowed to look at you. And if that's happening, you need to tell whoever is running that polling location that the poll watcher is getting too close. There are different ways for poll watchers to get qualified. Usually it's through the political parties. There can only be a certain number at each location. They also have poll watchers at the what we call central count, right, which is where votes are counted. So again,
do they have to wear something? Do we have
they
to
identify themselves? And so I think what's interesting is people have probably seen poll watchers, they just haven't noticed them. But now that there's a lot of talk about them, I think people might get more nervous. So again, if you feel like you're nervous, if you feel like somebody is interfering with your ability to cast your vote safely and privately, that's something that you need to raise with the clerks that are running your polling location. That's their job, right, is to make sure that the conduct of voting is happening legally, but also the voters are able to feel safe while they're cast their ballots. And they are trained to deal with poll watchers and other folks.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about what your office does. And I guess being here with us right here is a perfect example of it. But what your office does to help the integrity of the voting process and to work with Harris County to let them know we're out here and to let the voters know it's secure.
Yeah, that's why I'm here today, and that's why I work very closely with Clerk Tanisha Hudspeth, who's doing a phenomenal job. A lot of what we do, again, is advise on the election code, and making sure we're paying attention to changes in the code, making sure we're paying attention to the advisories that the Secretary of State's office puts out that say here's how you should be interpreting new laws. These laws change all the time, so people need to be educated on what these new laws are, and that's part of our job. And like I said, we also work very closely with law enforcement, with the clerk's office, to make sure that we can really have incident response, right? And to make sure that if something does happen at the polls, people feel like it's being addressed. And we've done that for years, and we'll continue to do that.
And during early voting, is it ever kind of parallel? If things go pretty well during early voting, we can expect that election day is going to be pretty seamless as well? Or do you always find that on election day there's going to be some hiccups?
Election day, there are many, many more polling locations. So
Right.
the odds of something happening just go up just for that reason alone, right? I think that's the biggest thing. And, early voting, we've had high numbers on a per day basis. Election day is still usually the highest voter turnout. So not only more locations, but more voters. In the end, right, when things happen, I'm using air quotes for those who can't hear me, it's usually some human error that can very quickly be rectified. Right. But these things have the tendency to take on a life of their own, and you might, I'll get texts from people saying, "Oh my God, this thing happened at this polling location." Then I look into it, and it turns out it either was nothing or it was something, but it was addressed correctly and right away. And so again, election day, just sheer number of voters in polling location increasing, you might have more of these incidents. I don't think there's more bad things happening on election day than during early voting.
And quickly before I let you go, I'm just curious we know you cannot take your cell phone into poll. You can have it on you, but you're not looking on your cell phone when you actually vote. An interesting thing happened to me this time. People are in line, long line outside of the room itself, and they were on their cell phones. When we were in view of the door into the room, the woman that was monitoring the line was like, "Phones down. I'm not going to get us in any trouble. Everyone put away your phones at this point." A sense of precaution, which I think was warranted, and that's good because she didn't want to have any problems coming down the road. What is the law on when you can have your phone out and when do you have to put it away?
It isn't really about the phone. It's about taking pictures. And as you know, I can be holding my phone, and you can't tell if I'm taking a picture. Right. So that's why the clerks are using their discretion. And like I said, that's their job, right? It's to make sure that everything operates correctly at the polls. And the election code affords them a fair amount of leeway to make those decisions on their own. And so if they think, look, I can't tell, right, when you're holding up your phone whether you're taking a picture or not. You can tell me that you're not, but I'm not looking at your screen. Right. If they want to say, "Hey, put that phone down,"
listen to them.
Listen to them.
Interim Harris County Attorney Jonathan Fombonne. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Ernie.
Tomorrow's election day. Don't forget to vote.